The wind came down the prairie like a ghost dragging its coat across the earth. Snow hadn't yet started, but the cold was sharp enough to split the lips. She walked with her shoulders tight, one hand holding the edge of the thin shawl that covered her head, the other wrapped firm around the bundle against her chest. The child didn't cry. Now he was too cold for that. Just a slow, wet breath against her collarbone, muffled in threadbare flannel. She saw the cabin when the last light of dusk slipped behind the ridge, sat crouched into the land like it had given up standing proud long ago, wood gray, porch half collapsed, chimney smoking soft but steady. She paused, blinked against the wind, and stepped forward. Each step pressed her worn boots deeper into snow-powdered dirt, till finally she stood at the door and raised her hand. The knock wasn't loud, just enough to be heard if someone was listening. Inside, a man stirred. He had been carving his hands quiet, his mind quieter. When he opened the door, he didn't blink, just looked. She didn't smile. "We won't stay long," she said. Her voice was hoarse, like someone who hadn't used it much lately. The baby made a sound, then more breath than cry, but enough. Silas Mercer looked at the bundle, then at her. He stepped aside. The cabin was warm, not from comfort, but from function. A fire burned low in the stone hearth. One cot stood by the wall, made with military care. A small bench, a pail of water near the door. A rocking chair sat by the fire unused, coated faintly in dust. She took it in silently. He pointed to the cat. She lowered herself onto it without protest. He dropped a folded blanket onto the floor and settled there. Back to the wall, knife still in hand. Neither spoke. The baby stirred. She rocked him lightly, humming something too broken to be called a song. Silas closed his eyes. Outside, snow began to fall. Inside, nothing moved but the firelight on old wood and the rise and fall of a newborn's chest. The morning came slow, as if the sky itself was uncertain about beginning again. Thin light poured through the cracks in the boards, laying pale ribbons across the floor. Silas was already outside, the thud of his axe echoing through the stillness, like a clock marking grief instead of time. Inside, Marin moved quietly. She kept the baby close, swaddled against her chest, one hand pressed to his small back as she poured water into a rusted pot. The coffee she made was more memory than strength, but she set it on the table anyway. He didn't thank her, and she didn't expect him to. Silence had become a language between them. She only spoke when she bent to touch the child's forehead. "Jonah," she whispered, as if saying his name out loud made him more real. Her voice trembled a little, not from cold.
"I'll later."
While folding cloth beside the hearth, she turned too fast. A sharp breath escaped her, and her body curled for just a second, hand pressed tight against her ribs.
Alice saw.
His eyes rested thereon, the bruises just beneath the collarbone, blooming yellow and blue beneath her neckline. He didn't ask, but the line of his jaw tightened as he went back outside, chopping harder than before. That evening, the baby finally slept, curled in an old crate padded with flannel. Marin sat by the fire holding a cracked ivory comb. She ran it once through her tangled hair, then held it in both hands and murmured something so low, even the baby didn't stir. Then, with slow purpose, she pulled her braid forward, lifted the knife from the hearth, and sawed it off at the base. She didn't flinch. The braid fell like rope to the floor. Silas stood in the doorway, unseen in the shadow. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched her feed the braid to the fire. The flames caught it quickly, a scent of burning hair, laced the air a scent that felt both final and ancient. She just watched until it was gone, then knelt to sweep the ashes away like she was erasing a part of herself. Later, when she stepped out to gather snow in a basin, Silas stepped near her satchel, as if intending to move it out of reach of the baby. But it fell open, and inside, folded beneath spare cloth and threadbare shirts, was a blood-stained shawl still damp in one corner. Wrapped beside it was something older, lace-trimmed muslin, once white, now browned at the edges with age. A wedding dress, worn thin from time, or maybe grief. He touched nothing, just looked, then closed the flap gently. That night, When she asked for more firewood, he gave her 2 extra logs without a word. She said thank you. He nodded once. But, for the first time, his eyes didn't leave hers. The storm came down sudden, as western storms do, warning but the way the wind changed. A hush first, then a low moan, and then the sky spilled over like it had been holding back too long. Snow swept across the prairie in wide, angry arcs. Thick enough to blind a man at 10 paces, it hit the cabin walls with a steady fury, rattling the windows, howling down the chimney like it had a name to scream. Silas shoved cloth into the cracks of the frame and dragged more wood to the hearth. The baby had started coughing, not loud, just dry and shallow, the kind of sound that made a man feel helpless. Maren paced with him wrapped close to her chest, her steps wearing a path across the floor. The cradle Silas had made rocked gently beside the fire, empty for now. When she finally sat, Silas noticed her hands were bleeding raw along the knuckles from where she'd tried to help brace the barn door earlier. He fetched the tin of salve and passed it without a word. She nodded, her eyes glassy, her lips trembling but quiet. Later, as night pressed hard against the windows and the roof groaned under the weight of snow, Maren spoke. It wasn't meant to be this way, she said softly, not looking at him. Was supposed to marry a man in Missouri. That's what my father said. But debt, ... makes a man cruel. Sold me to someone headed west. Settler. Called himself a rancher, but kept nothing but liquor and locked doors. She didn't cry. Her voice had no tremor now. Only the flatness of someone who's told the story to herself too many times. He left me at a boarding house when I started. Showing said I was a burden now. I walked for days after they turned me out. Then Jonah came early. She looked down at the child in her lap, now asleep, curled like a question mark between them. He's the only good thing, she whispered. Everything else is ash. Silas didn't move, didn't speak. Just watched the flames in the hearth stretch and pull like memory. The room felt thick with something older than weather, something that sat heavy on the chest. He thought of his wife, her laughter before the sickness, her hands on the cradle that never got used. Her silence stretched out longer than the prairie sky. He remembered the sound that baby made, the stillborn one. It had been silence. That was the worst of it. He didn't tell her any of this, just pulled the last quilt off his bedroll and laid it over her shoulders. The storm screamed overhead. Rafters trembled. But inside, there was only the steady crackle of wood, the rise and fall of breath, and a kind of peace that neither had known in years. Outside, the snow buried the road behind them. Inside, something else was being uncovered. Not quite trust, not yet hope, but the start of both. When the storm broke, it didn't leave behind silence. It left a kind of tension that settled in the bones like damp. The snow outside was deep but still, blanketing the land in white, like a fresh wound covered in gauze. The wind had calmed. But inside the cabin, the air was tighter somehow. Every movement measured, every glance more uncertain than the last. Silas rose early. He didn't speak as he pulled on his coat, just stepped outside with a saw and an armful of old fence rails. The sound of his work drifted in steady rhythm across the prairie, cutting, hammering, shaping. Maren didn't ask. But she watched from the window, Jonah resting on her chest, his cough lighter, but still present. She traced small circles on his back, each breath from him a kind of miracle. That evening, as dusk folded over the land, Maren stepped near the hearth to stoke the fire and found it there, a cradle. It was plain, rough in places, the wood uneven but sturdy. No varnish, no paint, just care. He hadn't said a word about it. She didn't either. But she fetched a cloth, warmed some water, and began to wipe the rails clean. She moved slow, as if honoring it, smoothing the knots with her fingers like prayer. 2 days later, the sky turned amber with a dry wind, and dust rose on the horizon. A figure appeared, lone rider, no sound but hoofbeats muffled by snow. Silas stepped out to meet him without hesitation. They spoke in low tones, not in English. Maren stood inside, tense, heart pounding. Her eyes never left the window. The rider's face was weathered, wrapped in a dark scarf. He said little, but when he dismounted, He pressed something into Silas's hand, a small pouch tied with a red thread. Herbs. Then, with quiet ceremony, he reached out and left a handprint, earth-colored, in Silas's shoulder. Then he rode. Off into the fading light. That night, Maren broke the silence. Her voice was soft, careful. "You've always been like that? Kind to strangers?" Silas didn't look up from the bowl he was carving. He said, "But I've learned." Ate in silence after that. The stew was thin but warm. Jonah slept in the new cradle, his breath slow and even. A breeze rattled the window panes, and the fire spit softly. Neither of them spoke again that night. But the quiet wasn't empty. It was full of questions neither could yet ask, of stories not yet ready to be shared, and still they stayed. Under the same roof? Because they had two, but because neither had stepped away? And that, in the hush of that long winter night, meant something. The sun hadn't yet broken the horizon when Silas noticed the door ajar and the snow disturbed and a thin trail leading away from the cabin. He didn't shout, just pulled on his coat, grabbed the rifle he hadn't touched in months, and followed. The faint imprints down the ridge trail boot prints alongside smaller, softer ones. He found her half a mile out, walking fast toward the canyon pass with the baby bundled tight to her chest. Her breath came out in puffs, each step tense. Her shoulders hunched like she was bracing for something she'd already survived once. Before, she didn't stop when she saw him. "I wasn't going to wake you," she said without turning. "Didn't." "Want to make it worse?" He didn't answer. "I saw what you built," she said quietly. "That cradle, that ... hope. And I can't take it from you." "I won't." He still said nothing, but his boots didn't stop crunching in the snow beside hers. "I bring trouble," she whispered, "wherever I go." They kept walking. It happened fast, too fast for talk. Two shadows burst from the rocks near the edge of the pass. One of them wore her father's old coat. The other held a rusted pistol, but not steady. "Give us the baby," one of them hissed. "It don't belong to you." Maren's scream wasn't loud. It was sharp, like something breaking inside her. She stepped back, clutching Jonah too. Her chest. Silas stepped forward. What followed wasn't clean. Oh, it wasn't righteous. It was hard fists and frozen ground, grunts and blood on the snow. The man in her father's coat took the first blow, a rifle butt to the side of the skull. The other tried to aim, but Silas was already on him, shoulder to chest, hand to throat. They fell hard, rolled in gravel and ice. The pistol fired once wild into the dirt. When it ended, one man was running, limping hard into the hills. The other lay still, face half in snow. Silas stood over him, breathing hard, blood from his knuckles dripping slow and steady. His hat was gone. His eyes looked far away. Maren didn't move at first. She just held Jonah, whispering something. Desperate and soundless, rocking him like she could keep the world from touching him. Silas turned. His face was streaked with dirt and blood, his hands trembling from more than cold. But when he saw her, Ellie saw her, he crossed the distance between them, did what neither of them had done before. He reached for her, not forcefully, just enough to steady her shaking. And she let him. She leaned into him, her forehead. To his chest, the baby between them, their breaths mingling in the cold. No words passed between them. Only the fire inside both of them, lit by fear and fury and something else that had no name yet. They walked back as the sky turned pale. No one spoke of what had happened, but the blood on Silas's knuckles and the way Maren walked closer too. Him than before said enough. The cabin door creaked when they entered. The fire had gone low, but its warmth lingered. He lit it again, quietly, and she laid Jonah back in the cradle. Their eyes met in the half-light. Something had shifted. Not spoken, not named, but it burned between them just the same. The days grew longer, and the cold lifted little by little. Snow melted into dark earth, and green pushed up along the fence posts like it had been waiting for permission. Silas mended the barn roof in slow sections. Maren boiled water in a real kettle, not just a dented tin. Curtains appeared in the windows, stitched by hand, uneven at the hems. And Jonah, wrapped now in clothes that fit and washed with soap that smelled of lye and pine, laughed for the first time. It was a surprise kind of sound, high and sudden, and it stopped both Silas and Maren where they stood. The hens scattered. Startled, Silas had been holding the boy, showing him how to toss seed into the dirt. Jonah's laughter rose again, brighter this time, and something in Silas's face shifted. It didn't soften, not quite. But the hard lines eased like old rope made pliant by rain. One morning, the sheriff rode up, dust on his coat, his hat low against the sun. He didn't dismount, just sat there, rein slack in one hand. "Said you killed a man," he muttered, chewing the inside of his cheek. Other one ran off and claimed self-defense. Silas didn't reply. The sheriff looked past him, toward the cabin where Maren stood in the doorway, Jonah propped on one hip. He glanced back at Silas. "Reckons some men deserve worse than they get," he said. "Weather's warming. You got fence to mend. I won't bother you again," and he rode off without another word. That evening, Maren was in the garden patch when Silas stepped outside with something in his hands, a small box, plain pine. He walked to her, slow, as if unsure if he should. Inside was the braid, the one she had cut off and burned, or thought she had. He'd kept a piece, pressed it between waxed cloth, wrapped in a handkerchief. Now he set the box gently in her palm. No explanation, no request. He turned and left her standing there, the breeze catching strands of her new short hair. She found him at dusk, by the south fence. He was crouched in the dirt, stretching wire tight along posts as the sun dipped low behind the hills. Dust caught the light in gold ribbons, and the prairie went quiet. She didn't speak right away, just sat beside him. Jonah crawled toward them, clumsy and determined. Damned, his fingers grabbed fistfuls of grass and gravel as he made his slow journey. When he reached them, he clutched Maren's boot, then looked up at Silas and grinned. "We're not guests anymore, are we?" she whispered. Silas didn't answer right away. Stared out at the land, jaw set, hands rough from cedar and time. Then he nodded once. He reached for her hand, not with force, not even certainty, but with the calm weight of someone choosing something slow, something real. The wind carried the scent of spring-wet earth, wood smoke, and something sweeter. The rocking chair creaked gently on the porch behind them. Inside, firelight flickered, like it had always belonged there. Some fences kept things out. But this one held what had been found.